The classroom was unusually quiet that morning. The sun filtered weakly through the tall windows, throwing long lines of light across the desks. For a moment, it almost felt like the start of any ordinary school day. But then it happened. One sentence, one claim, that broke the silence like shattered glass. A young boy, sitting near the middle of the room, had spoken with a steady voice. "My father works at the Pentagon." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The words hung in the air, heavy, almost unbelievable. Then the sound of laughter filled the room. It started with a few giggles, then spread like wildfire. Soon, the classroom echoed with mocking voices, as if the boy had told the funniest joke of the year. At the front of the room, the teacher adjusted her glasses and smirked. She was not angry, not even annoyed. She looked entertained. "Your dad works at the Pentagon?" "Really?" she said, her voice sharp and dripping with disbelief. The boy's cheeks flushed red, but his eyes did not waver. He looked straight at the teacher and repeated, firm and calm, "Yes, my father does." The laughter grew louder. Some students pointed at him, whispering to one another. A girl leaned toward her friend and said in a loud whisper, "He just wants attention." Another boy shook his head, grinning. "Yeah, maybe next he'll say his dad is the president." The teacher crossed her arms and chuckled. "You know, lying doesn't make people respect you," she said, her tone half scolding, half mocking. "If you wanted to impress the class, you could have at least come up with a more believable story." The boy stayed quiet this time. His lips pressed together, but his posture did not break. He sat straight, calm, as if he had no reason to defend himself further. His silence only seemed to irritate the teacher more. "What's the truth, really?" she asked, leaning closer. "Your father probably works at a gas station or an office downtown, doesn't he? Nothing wrong with that. But the Pentagon? That's a little too much for a boy like you to claim." The word stung, but the boy didn't flinch. His eyes were steady. He did not argue, did not protest. He simply stared back at her, quiet and certain. The room, however, was far from quiet. Students whispered, giggled, and threw glances at him, as if waiting for him to finally break down and admit it was all a lie. But he didn't. He just sat there, calm, almost too calm for a child being mocked so openly. And that was when something shifted. It wasn't anything anyone could see, at least not at first. It was more like a feeling, a strange, heavy tension that filled the air. The laughter of the students began to die down, not because they wanted to stop, but because they suddenly felt uneasy. The boy's silence wasn't the silence of shame. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of someone who knew something no one else did. Something important. The teacher, sensing the mood in the room change, tried to brush it off. "Class, let's get back to our lesson," she said, tapping the chalk against the board. But her voice lacked the sharp authority it usually carried. For the first time, there was doubt behind her words. The boy's eyes never left her. His calmness made her uncomfortable, though she didn't admit it. Teachers were used to having the final word, to being the authority in the room. Yet, this small child, with nothing but quiet confidence, had shifted the balance. One student raised his hand timidly. "Miss, what if he's telling the truth?" The question was like a spark in a dry forest. Heads turned, eyes widened. The teacher froze, her mouth slightly open. For a second, she looked as if she didn't know what to say. Finally, she forced a laugh. "The truth? Oh, come on. Do you know how hard it is to even step inside the Pentagon, let alone work there? People train their whole lives to get positions in that building. And you're telling me his father works there?" She pointed toward the boy with a sharp, mocking motion. But her words didn't erase the doubt. The seed had been planted. The students looked at the boy differently now. Some still smirked, but others weren't so sure anymore. The boy finally spoke again, his voice calm, low, but steady enough for the whole class to hear. "I don't need to prove anything. You'll see." The words were simple, but they carried weight that made the classroom fall into uneasy silence. Even the teacher, who had mocked him just moments ago, found herself speechless for a second. She quickly shook it off, forcing her usual smile, and turned back to the board. "Enough nonsense," she said. "Let's continue the lesson." But no one was paying attention to the lesson anymore. Every student kept glancing at the boy. Some whispered nervously. Others stayed quiet, their curiosity burning. And though the boy sat in the same position, not moving, not even smiling, the room felt different now. Heavy, strange, almost as if something was waiting to happen, something that none of them, not even the teacher, could stop. By the time the bell rang, dismissing the class, the laughter had completely disappeared. Students left in groups, whispering and glancing back at the boy. The teacher stayed at her desk longer than usual, pretending to shuffle papers, but her eyes kept darting toward the empty chair he had left behind. That calm silence, those steady eyes, his final words, they lingered like a shadow, refusing to fade. And though no one admitted it out loud, everyone in that room felt the same cold question echo in their minds. What if he was telling the truth? The next morning, the classroom buzzed with quiet energy. Students whispered to one another before the teacher arrived, but the topic wasn't homework or tests or even weekend plans. It was about him, the boy who had claimed his father worked at the Pentagon. Nobody said it too loudly, but everyone had thought about it the night before. His calm words, his unshaken face, his steady eyes. It wasn't how a liar looked. Some kids joked that he was crazy. Others said he was just stubborn. But deep down, a question kept repeating in their minds. What if he was telling the truth? The teacher walked in, trying to hide her own unease. She started her lesson quickly, her voice a little sharper than usual, as if she wanted to erase yesterday's memory with busy noise. But she couldn't. The room felt heavy, the students distracted. Every time they glanced at the boy, sitting quietly in the middle, the weight returned. The boy didn't raise his hand, didn't argue, didn't even look at the teacher. He just wrote in his notebook calmly, as if nothing had happened. Halfway through the lesson, the teacher's voice broke the air. "So," she said suddenly, her eyes narrowing on him, "are we going to hear more wild stories today? Or was yesterday enough?" A few students chuckled, relieved that she brought it up. Others stayed quiet, uneasy again. The boy lifted his eyes from the notebook. His voice was calm, the same as before. "I don't lie. My father really works at the Pentagon." The teacher shook her head and sighed loudly. "Enough. Stop saying things like that. You're only embarrassing yourself." But before the boy could reply, before anyone else could laugh or whisper, something happened. A sound. The door. It opened. At first, no one turned, thinking it was just another teacher or maybe the principal. But then the footsteps entered, measured, heavy, firm. The sound of boots striking the floor. Every head turned toward the door, and silence fell over the classroom like a sudden storm. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered. His presence filled the room instantly. He wasn't wearing ordinary clothes. He wore a crisp uniform, dark and sharp, with shining buttons. His chest carried insignias, symbols that none of the children fully understood but instinctively knew were important. And on his belt, something more chilling. A badge. A Pentagon identification badge. The teacher froze mid-sentence. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The students sat stiffly in their chairs, eyes wide, breaths held. The boy looked up, and for the first time he smiled. "Hi, Dad." The man's stern face softened slightly as he looked at his son. Then his eyes swept across the room, scanning each child, each desk, and finally stopping on the teacher. His gaze was not cruel, not angry, but powerful, enough to make her flinch. "I'm here for my son," he said in a voice that was calm but carried weight, the kind of voice that could silence even the noisiest crowd. The students stared, stunned. Their whispers from yesterday now felt like knives twisting in their chests. He wasn't lying. Every giggle, every smirk, every word of mockery, they had all been wrong. The teacher forced a smile, her voice shaky. "Oh, of course. We were just—" She stopped, realizing no excuse would sound right. The boy stood, collecting his things calmly. He didn't gloat, didn't laugh, didn't even look at his classmates. He just walked toward the man at the door as if this was the most normal thing in the world. But for the rest of the class, it wasn't normal at all. It was terrifying. As the boy walked out, the man placed a hand on his shoulder. "We need to leave now," he said, his voice low. The teacher finally found her words. "Is everything all right?" The man paused at the door, turning his head slightly. His eyes locked with hers. "There are things happening you don't need to know about," he said simply. Then he stepped out, his son beside him, and the door closed behind them with a heavy click. For a moment, the classroom remained frozen, as if the world had stopped. Then the whisper started, low, frantic, scared. "Did you see his badge? It really said Pentagon." He wasn't lying. He wasn't lying at all. The teacher sat at her desk, pale, her hands trembling slightly. She stared at the closed door, her thoughts racing. What had she done yesterday? What had she said to that boy? But before anyone could calm down, before the room could settle, another sound cut through the chaos. Not the bell, not the chatter of students. It was outside, distant but growing louder. The low rumble of engines, strange, heavy engines, not like cars or buses. The ground vibrated faintly beneath their feet. The children went silent again, glancing toward the windows. Shadows moved outside, dark shapes passing quickly, like large vehicles or something more. The teacher stood slowly, her heart pounding. She didn't know why, but she felt something deep, something instinctive. The boy's father hadn't just come to pick him up. His arrival meant more, much more. And as the shadows grew and the sound outside deepened, one truth became clear to everyone in that classroom. This was only the beginning. The sound outside grew louder. It wasn't just one vehicle, it was many. The rumble of engines shook the glass windows, making them buzz faintly. Shadows passed quickly across the playground, long and sharp, like giant machines crawling by. The children pressed their faces against the windows, their eyes wide. "What is that?" one whispered. "Military trucks?" another guessed. But no one truly knew. The teacher's hands tightened around the edge of her desk. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, now cracked when she spoke. "Everyone sit down. Now." But nobody moved. The children's curiosity was stronger than her words. Even she found herself walking slowly toward the window, unable to resist. Outside, a convoy rolled into view. Dark, armored vehicles with unfamiliar symbols painted on their sides. Soldiers in heavy gear stood in the open backs, their helmets hiding their faces. The children gasped. This wasn't the ordinary military they sometimes saw on the news. These soldiers looked different. Their armor was thicker, their movements sharper, almost otherworldly. The teacher felt her throat tighten. What was happening? Then the boy's father appeared again, stepping into the schoolyard. He didn't look back at the classroom, but walked quickly toward the convoy. Several soldiers saluted him instantly. The children's jaws dropped. Saluting? To him? Whispers rushed through the room. He must be a general, or something even higher. I thought the Pentagon was just offices. The teacher stayed quiet, her face pale. She was beginning to understand just how badly she had misjudged the boy. Then, something even stranger happened. One of the vehicles opened at the back. Not for soldiers, but for crates, massive steel crates, locked tight with glowing seals. Soldiers moved carefully, almost nervously, as if guarding something dangerous inside. The boy's father stood near them, giving orders she couldn't hear. His face was hard, serious. Suddenly, the classroom door opened again. Everyone jumped. It wasn't him this time. It was the principal, his face red with worry. He looked at the teacher first, then at the children. "You all need to stay calm," he said quickly. "No one leaves the building. Do you understand?" The teacher frowned. "What's going on? Why are there?" The principal cut her off. "It's classified." His eyes darted nervously toward the window. "And if you value your jobs, your future, you won't ask questions." The children froze at the word, classified. They had heard it in movies and stories, but to hear it now, in their school, made everything real and terrifying. The teacher's voice shook. But the boy's father, the principal only shook his head. "He isn't just a father. He's someone you don't laugh at. Not ever." The teacher swallowed hard, her stomach twisting with guilt. The ground shook again. This time, it wasn't from vehicles. It was heavier, deeper, like something massive being moved. The crates. The children stepped back from the windows, their fear rising. "What's in those boxes?" one whispered. The teacher tried to calm them. "It's probably just equipment," but her own voice betrayed her. She didn't believe it. Then the boy's father raised a hand. Soldiers stopped moving. The convoy froze in place. He gave another signal, and one of the glowing locks on a crate hissed open. Cold mist poured out, spilling over the ground like fog. Inside the classroom, everyone held their breath. The crate door slid open with a metallic groan. For one terrible second, there was nothing but the mist. Then, something moved inside. A shape. Large. Wrong. Not human. The teacher's heart nearly stopped. She couldn't see it clearly, only the outline. A towering figure with strange, jagged edges, as if its body didn't belong in this world. The soldiers aimed their weapons immediately. Their stance wasn't casual. It was tense, desperate. They were afraid. The boy's father didn't flinch. His voice carried across the yard, calm but firm. "Contain it." The classroom erupted in whispers again, but all voices were hushed, urgent, frightened. "Did you see that? That wasn't human. What is it doing here?" The teacher stumbled backward, her breathing quick. She realized the Pentagon wasn't just about offices or politics. It was about secrets. Secrets far bigger than she had ever imagined. And the boy, the quiet boy she had mocked, was at the center of it all. The principal clapped his hands, snapping everyone's attention back. Everyone away from the windows. Right now. His voice was sharp, almost panicked. Slowly, the children obeyed, though some peeked over their shoulders. The teacher moved to close the blinds, her hands shaking. As the last sliver of the outside world vanished behind the curtain, one thought hammered inside every head in that classroom. If that creature was real, if the Pentagon was hiding things like that, then the boy's father wasn't just important. He was someone who stood between ordinary people and something terrifying. And for the first time, the teacher wondered, had she mocked not only the boy, but the only person in the room who might be able to keep them safe? The classroom was quiet. Too quiet. Every student sat frozen in their chair, their eyes locked on the covered windows. They couldn't see what was happening outside anymore, but they could still hear it. A deep, low growl rattled the air. It wasn't the sound of a machine, it was alive. Some children gasped. Others gripped their desks with white knuckles. Even the teacher pressed her hands to her mouth, her chest rising and falling quickly. Outside, soldiers shouted orders. Boots thudded against the ground. Weapons clicked as they were armed. And through it all, the growl grew louder, sharper, until it broke into a roar that shook the very walls of the classroom. One boy whispered, "That's not an animal, is it?" The teacher couldn't answer. She didn't know. Suddenly, the loudspeaker in the hallway crackled to life. The principal's voice came through, hard and commanding. "Attention, students and staff. Remain in your classrooms. Do not look outside. Do not leave your rooms until further notice. This is not a drill." Every child's stomach dropped. Not a drill. Those words turned their fear into something worse. The boy, the one who had been mocked, sat at his desk calm but tense. His eyes weren't on the teacher or the other students. He was listening closely to the chaos outside. The teacher finally broke the silence. "You're your father. He's really in charge of this, isn't he?" The boy didn't look at her. He just nodded once. Before she could say more, the sound outside changed. A crash. Metal tearing. Soldiers screaming. The children cried out, covering their ears. One brave girl stood and peeked through the blinds before the teacher could stop her. Her face went pale. "It's out," she whispered. It broke free. The teacher yanked her away from the window. "Sit down," she snapped, though her own hands were shaking violently. Then came the thuds. Heavy, pounding footsteps. Each one shook dust from the ceiling tiles. Whatever was out there was huge. Too huge for a schoolyard. The boy closed his eyes. He whispered something so quietly only the student next to him could hear. They weren't ready for it. Outside, the boy's father shouted orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold the line. Don't let it near the civilians." A roar answered him. A roar that was not human. The teacher pressed her hands over her ears. "What is that thing?" she thought. "Why would the Pentagon bring it here?" Then the classroom door slammed open. Two men in black suits rushed inside. They weren't teachers, and they weren't local police. They wore earpieces, and their faces were grim. "Everyone stay calm," one of them said quickly. We are securing the building. The teacher stammered. What's happening out there? What is that thing? The man looked at her with cold eyes. You don't need to know. But the boy stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't need to know, he said firmly. That thing isn't supposed to be here. My dad promised me it was locked away. The two men exchanged quick looks. Their silence was louder than words. The teacher's mind spun. Locked away? Promised? The boy knew more than all of them? Before she could question him, another crash shook the school. The lights flickered. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Screams echoed from another hallway. The agents pulled out weapons she had never seen before. Strange, compact rifles with glowing edges. Not normal guns. Not even close. One of them barked into his radio. Creature breached outer perimeter. Repeat, it's moving toward the east wing. The east wing. The students gasped. That was their wing. The teacher's blood went cold. It's coming here. Panic erupted. Children screamed. Chairs toppled. Desks scraped across the floor. The agents raised their weapons toward the door, their eyes sharp, waiting. Then came the sound again, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The floor trembled with each one. Closer, closer. The boy didn't panic like the others. He stood tall, his eyes locked on the door. If it comes here, it's looking for him, he said quietly. It's looking for my dad. The teacher's breath caught. Why? Why your father? The boy finally turned, his young face set in stone. His words were quiet, but they carried like thunder. Because he's the only one who ever beat it. The door rattled. Dust fell from the frame. Something massive pressed against it from the other side. The children screamed again. The teacher's heart raced so fast she thought it might burst. The boy's father was out there, leading soldiers. But here, in this classroom, his son stood waiting for a monster that wasn't supposed to exist. And now, every single person in that room realized the truth. This wasn't about a boy making up stories. This wasn't about a teacher's cruel joke. This was about something far bigger, something dangerous, secret, and unstoppable. And it had just found them. The classroom door shuttered again, this time harder. A loud crack shot through the air as the wood began to splinter. The students screamed, pressing back into the farthest corners of the room. Desks toppled over, chairs clattered against the walls. The two men in black suits raised their strange rifles, their jaws tight. One whispered into his earpiece, "It's here. It's right outside our position." Then came a sound, a hiss, low, deep, wet. It was followed by a scrape, like claws dragging across metal. The teacher could barely breathe. Sweat ran down her forehead. Every instinct in her body told her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The boy, still calm, stood tall in the center of the room. His eyes didn't leave the trembling door. He wasn't afraid, though his small hands were clenched into fists. One of the agents barked, "Kid, get back!" But he didn't move. The door cracked again. This time, part of it bent inward. A long, black claw pierced straight through the wood. The children screamed as the claw dragged downward, splitting the door open. The teacher covered her mouth to keep from crying out. She thought she was about to faint. Suddenly, fire! One of the agents roared. Blinding blue light burst from the strange rifles. Bolts of energy slammed into the door. The claw yanked back, screeching as sparks flew. The classroom filled with the sound of weapons firing, deafening and terrifying. For a moment, it seemed like the creature had been pushed back. The thudding footsteps retreated a few paces down the hallway. Then silence. A silence worse than the noise. Everyone held their breath, straining to hear. The lights flickered above. Somewhere in the distance, the intercom sputtered with static. And then they heard it. A growl. Slow. Rising. Followed by a deep, bone-shaking roar that made the windows rattle in their frames. One child sobbed openly. The teacher held her arms around the closest students, though she was shaking as badly as they were. The boy whispered, his voice steady but cold. "It's angry now." The agents glanced at him, confusion and fear mixing in their eyes. "What do you mean angry? What is this thing?" one demanded. The boy finally looked at them. His voice was quiet, but every person in the room heard it. "It's not from here. It's not from our world." The teacher's heart skipped a beat. Not from here. She wanted to deny it, to call it impossible, but the sound in the hallway told her he wasn't lying. Before anyone could speak again, the hallway erupted. Another crash. Metal tore like paper. The ceiling shook as dust poured down. And then, a shadow fell across the broken door frame. Huge. Twisted. Wrong. All they saw at first were the eyes. Two glowing, slitted eyes that cut through the darkness like knives. The students screamed again. One fainted. The teacher staggered back, pressing herself against the far wall. The agents fired. Blue light flashed again and again, filling the room with strobing brightness. The creature roared in fury, its claws smashing into the doorframe, splintering it completely. The monster was inside now. Its head was too large, its body too bent to be natural. Black scales shimmered under the flickering lights. Rows of jagged teeth glistened with saliva as it snarled. Its claws were long enough to slice a desk in half with a single swipe. The children cried, pressing back as far as they could go. Desks were their only shield, but everyone knew they would break in seconds. The teacher whispered a prayer under her breath. She couldn't believe this was real. She couldn't believe she was standing in a classroom with a thing like this. The boy, however, stepped forward. His face was pale, but his eyes were fierce. He didn't flinch as the monster's glowing eyes locked onto him. "It's looking for my father," he said again, louder this time. The creature growled, lowering itself, claws scraping against the floor. The sound made everyone's bones ache. The door at the back of the classroom slammed open. "Move aside," a powerful voice shouted. It was him, the boy's father, dressed in a black combat uniform, weapon in hand. He stepped into the room without hesitation. Soldiers followed behind him, lining the walls, aiming advanced weapons at the monster. The teacher gasped. The boy's father looked exactly like someone who belonged in the Pentagon. Sharp, commanding, dangerous. But the way he walked, the way the monster froze at the sight of him, it was more than that. The boy's eyes lit up. Relief spread across his face for the first time all day. "Dad." The man nodded once at his son, then turned his full attention to the creature. His voice was steady, strong, and cold. "I warned them never to bring you here," he said to the monster. The creature roared, shaking the room. Desks slid across the floor. Windows cracked. Students screamed, but the father didn't flinch. He stepped forward, weapon raised. And for the first time, the teacher and students saw something in the monster's eyes, something impossible. Fear. The room shook with the monster's roar. Glass shattered, desks cracked, and children clung to one another in terror. The two agents in black suits fired desperately, but their energy bolts only slowed the creature. It was too strong. Then, the boy's father stepped forward. Every movement he made was calm, controlled. His eyes glowed faintly in the flickering light, not like the monster's, but enough for the teacher to notice. The boy stood straighter now, no longer ashamed. He whispered proudly, "That's my dad." The teacher's heart pounded. For once, she couldn't deny it. The man radiated authority. Even the monster, huge and terrifying, hesitated when his eyes locked onto it. The father raised his weapon, a sleek black rifle unlike anything the class had ever seen. Symbols glowed faintly across its barrel. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice steady. The monster snarled, saliva dripping from its jagged teeth. It crouched low, claws digging deep into the floor. Then it lunged. Everything happened in seconds. The children screamed. The agents dove aside. The creature's claws slashed through the air, aiming for the father's chest. But he didn't move, not until the last possible moment. Then, a flash of light. His weapon released a blast, so bright it lit the entire room like the sun. The shot slammed into the creature's chest, sending it crashing back into the wall. Concrete cracked. The monster shrieked in pain. The father didn't stop. He fired again, and again. Each shot forced the creature back, ripping apart scales and filling the air with the smell of burning flesh. The teacher shielded the children, but she couldn't look away. She had never seen such power. The monster roared in rage, stumbling forward despite its wounds. Its glowing eyes locked on the boy. It wanted him. With a scream, it charged again. This time, the father didn't fire. He dropped his weapon and stepped into its path with nothing but his bare hands. The students gasped. The teacher's throat caught. Was he insane? But as the monster swung its claws down, the father caught its wrist. The classroom fell silent. The creature struggled, its massive arms straining against his grip. But the father held firm. Veins bulged in his neck, muscles tense, as if he was holding back the weight of the world. "You should never have come here," he growled. The monster shrieked in rage, snapping its teeth inches from his face. But then, to everyone's shock, the father forced the creature back step by step. It thrashed, it clawed, it howled, but it was losing. The teacher whispered, "He's stronger than it." The boy stood tall, proud. "I told you. My dad works at the Pentagon, but not the way you think." Everyone stared at him. The father finally shoved the monster back. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a glowing blade, long and sharp. The weapon hummed with energy, vibrating the air itself. The creature froze. Its glowing eyes widened. For the first time, it looked afraid. The father raised the blade high. "Back to where you came from." With one powerful strike, he drove the blade through the creature's chest. A blinding flash consumed the room. The monster let out one final, deafening scream, then burst into ash and light. When the glow faded, nothing remained. The classroom was silent, except for the children's heavy breaths and the teacher's sobs of shock. The father lowered his weapon. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of secrets too heavy to name. He turned to his son. For the first time, his expression softened. "You did well." The boy smiled faintly. The teacher, trembling, stepped forward. Her voice cracked. What was that thing?" The father looked at her for a long moment, as though deciding how much truth she could handle. Then he said, "It was not from this world. My work at the Pentagon is not what you think. I don't deal with politics. I deal with threats that shouldn't exist." Her mouth fell open. The room felt colder somehow, as if reality itself had shifted. The children stared at him, eyes wide. None of them would ever forget what they had seen. He adjusted his jacket, the strange blade vanishing back into its sheath. "You were never supposed to know," he said. "But now you do. Keep it to yourselves. Forget what you saw, if you can." He turned toward the boy. "Come on, son. We're leaving." The boy followed without hesitation. But just before leaving, he looked back at the class, the same kids who had laughed at him hours ago. His voice was quiet but filled with pride. "I wasn't lying. My dad really works at the Pentagon." The classroom stayed silent as the door closed behind them. The teacher's knees gave out, and she sank into a chair. The laughter from earlier seemed like a memory from another life, because now she knew the truth. The boy's father didn't just work at the Pentagon. He defended the world from things no one else could face. And today, they had all seen it with their own eyes.